Good morning, good afternoon, and I'm glad to be here today. My name is Mark Smith, the CEO and EVP of Research at Ventana Research, to talk to you about the business and technology of cloud computing. I'm so glad to be here to kick off CloudSlam 2011, a virtual conference today, to talk to you about the business and technology of cloud computing. The advents of cloud computing continue to move forward as organizations look to improve their business processes and their ability to compete in the global marketplaces. And the technology for cloud computing has continued to advance to make it simpler and easier for organizations to take advantage of cloud computing. So as all you know, cloud computing has been a significant leap forward for the technology computing landscape to get back to the fundamentals of computing and making them, frankly, available for businesses of all sizes to move their organizations forward and help leverage the infrastructure of the environments that are available in the cloud to the everyday business person, no matter at what level, what role, and what organization or industry. So it's really great to see the significant movements that have made cloud computing a reality, and I'll talk about some of those trends and directions this morning and this afternoon for those of you linking in from across the world. Just a little bit. I spent the last 22 years in the technology and business landscape. Ventana Research has hit almost a decade of providing research and advice to organizations spanning across business applications to middleware to tools and across the business technology innovations I'll speak about, from mobility to collaboration to analytics to social media, and really helping organizations think differently about how to use technology for business. Of course, if you want to find me on Twitter at MarkSmithVR, or you can reach me via email at mark.smith@ventanaresearch.com. Ventana Research has been providing benchmarks and education for almost a decade, as I mentioned, and through our work across the industry, we've been able to help organizations save significant time in both applying best practices, improving business processes, and advancing the technology landscape across a multitude of line of business areas and also the IT organization. As we've seen, business and consumers are demanding improvement, and frankly, it comes down about as simple as looking at how do we make them faster, smarter, safer, cheaper, and better. And we've found that organizations are demanding improvement in significant faster cycles than ever before. And organizations need to rethink their overall business strategies and their IT processes to support them to make sure they can drive better outcomes. It is no surprise that while we find ourselves in a recovery in most economies around the world, that now organizations are looking to how to utilize their leaner organizations, their business processes, and really drive better performance throughout them, and really self-assess their current environments and their efforts. Cloud computing, as I mentioned, is one of the business's technology innovations that Ventana Research sees for the decade that are going to significantly transform how businesses operate. And cloud computing in itself is a very powerful lever for organizations to basically leapfrog and advance their infrastructure to support a new realm of applications and services and tools that I'll speak about, but also as an ability for organizations to on-ramp into taking advantage of the social media, collaboration, mobility, and even analytics, and bring these together to drive a new class of business enablement for organizations. And I'll speak about that today and give you some particular insights to the advancements that we've seen, and frankly how we see that you should prioritize your environments for driving improvements. Now, obviously, the global access to services and applications becomes a very interesting, transition because it becomes virtualized and transparent to you and your business, and frankly, all consumer and business workers. Cloud computing now enables businesses to provide a new set of consumer services to basically reach people around the world every second of the day. It also helps organizations find a way to make the distribution of their products and services a heck of a lot easier. And when we look at the transition of global supply chains to a distributed model, basically riding with information about where product services are available and where they need to be distributed to, we can really truly look at the whole nature of just-in-time processes. Also, as we've already seen, real-time financial services continue to become simpler and easier with the ability of mobile applications operating in the cloud, bridging into private cloud environments where banks can help provide a portfolio of services to be able to meet their customers' needs. In addition, we see a consumer set of expectations that they should make these things available, and they need to be instantaneously available at any time of the day. And clearly the smartphones and tablets have now enabled people that want to be able to flip on within a second, have access to their information about their service or things that they're looking to get access to. And this mobilization trend is not something that is something small. In fact, the shipment of tablets and smartphones now exceeding traditional computers, and frankly, the next age of how computing will happen around the world will require a full interconnect of public to private clouds in a much more streamlined manner, and provides a new set of examinations on the kinds of cloud computing infrastructure that are required for driving improvement. Now, cloud computing is clearly something that I think everybody's got their arms around. At Ventana Research, we define it as the internet-based computing model, where we can share resources, software, and information, and provide them on demand like a public utility. Pretty obvious. We're still, believe it or not, going through a pretty significant educational curve to business professionals around what is cloud computing, what is it not, and how do we make sure that it's contextual to their business areas and their needs. Now, cloud computing brings forward basically three major areas of addressing challenges in today's organizations. One is the availability of applications and services that, frankly, organizations are trying to get their arms around, where the technology complexity impacting IT has slowed down the ability to introduce applications and tools, and in many cases then issues around making sure they're available 7/24. This has actually had a pretty significant impact where if they're not made available and not available in a continuous manner anywhere around the world as business workers travel, then the business and financial results can be impaired. Second is optimization. Cloud computing provides new methods for optimizing business processes and looking at the ability for driving improvements and looking at the necessary elements of using the resources that are available. And so what we need to do is to spend less time on managing the technology infrastructure, more time on helping businesses optimize their activities and their processes. Simplification. We need to start to transition from basically the bulking up of data centers from a significant set of applications and tools and systems, And while we've done a lot to reduce the amount of servers and computing power to support them, we've got a pretty sizable spaghetti of applications and systems. And we can start to simplify that by looking at new means to provide applications and services, and make sure that we start to look at how to offload, migrate, and support applications, existing applications, in a much more streamlined manner. KTLO, from keeping the lights on, is that we want to reduce keeping the lights on budget, so there's more IT budget available for business improvement and driving innovations to become much more competitive in the global marketplace. And if we don't do this, we're obviously going to increase the costs and delays in supporting the organization's needs. Now, I think we can all agree that the scaling of cloud computing has had a significant onboard and testing by the massive changes in the last 3 years, specifically around cloud services, and consumers have been driving towards major areas of whether or not it's Google or Facebook or the App Store or Twitter or eBay or LinkedIn. We find that this is clearly the test bed of making cloud services broadly available for business needs, and that as soon as you're supporting hundreds of millions or even over 1 billion individuals against consumer services, this provides some pretty significant testing and working through technologies that can then, obviously, as they are now, beginning to transition to be backbones of many of the cloud services that can be used by businesses, which really, in essence, is a real blessing to help business and IT be assured that if they work in a environment that they're looking at the right technologies, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that they can actually find some significant places that improvements can be made. Now, cloud computing enables rapid collaboration. I talked about this notion of collaboration, and it's so important as we look at businesses who are basically virtualizing their workforce of working out of home offices, remote locations, and collaboration becomes a really important element of driving the best productivity and the best results. And we need to think about how to use collaboration, in many cases potentially consumer-based collaboration environments that are secured for businesses, to help make sure that we can provide these capabilities in a much more rapid manner than just thinking about taking on some gigantic portal or collaboration and installing it on premise. We need to look at how do we onboard and get people engaged using multiple sets of techniques of forums and video sharing and broadcasting and crowdcasting and things like that to help support a much more tighter collaboration across sales forces, customer service, and then across the line of business areas as well. Now, cloud computing enables broader mobility, and one of the great things that has happened over the last couple years is that the massive adoption of different kinds of smartphones and tablets, but also new kinds of services that can be made available from traditional web browser views directly into tablet views. It might be across things like the iPad, maybe all the way through Zooms and Android-based tablets, and even the upcoming release and announcements of the Playbook by RIM. All these then can be made to operate using the cloud computing infrastructure and using shared servers and services to then bridge over potentially into private clouds or directly into your enterprise. So cloud computing is a significant step forward in transforming business, and we really do believe that if you start to look at how you can reduce the time, cost, and risk of your enterprise and look at how to drive better value, there's probably no more logical method to drive improvements than there is using cloud computing. And that is, in essence, what we've been driving research and education is helping each line of business area realize the potential of what they can do in bringing applications and services to bear where they don't necessarily need to purchase and install them. They can rent them and configure them and make them more directly available. And this is a significant shift that we should all not take for granted that is already complete, that we're really just beginning that transition point that many in business still are just beginning to see a lot of the discussion over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, cloud computing and software and service is a new approach to an old idea. As many of you know, time sharing and renting access to particular slices of computing power in a single tenant and kind of shared environment for computing power and is something that now has transitioned into a full nature of how do we use computing environments, and no matter if they're multi-tenant or single-tenant, we can now begin to look at how to provide these kinds of advancements in a much more simpler environment. But we also need to realize that that we're going to be working in a hybrid environment from public clouds to enterprise environments, but we also need to look at the interconnects of clouds that we can use to support the business initiatives and the priorities of the organization. I'm going to talk a little bit about the layers of cloud computing because we still continue to provide some pretty fundamental education about how to look at the layers of cloud computing and look at then what kinds of opportunities do you have for driving improvements, and where do you need to kind of rethink how you interconnect cloud computing environments in both public and private cloud environments directly back into your enterprise. So let's talk a little bit about that. You know, we look at cloud computing as a series of clouds and interconnects of whether or not they're you're trying to provide applications or tools or services, whether or not your IT group's working on platform integration and infrastructure. But these are all interoperating, and it's important to realize that this is not some single box, single cloud appliance that you buy from one vendor. This is not some kind of single database that you buy from one vendor. This is not one particular application that you might buy for word processing. This is actually an interconnected set of clouds that you start to need to think about how you strategically are providing the framework and the cloud connects that provide this utility for your business, and then how do you continue to safely and securely bring these together in a much more rapid manner and be much more engaged. We found IT organizations just beginning to really assess what businesses have been adopting in a pretty large manner over the last 3 years and start to frame what cloud applications are already being used and rented, and then how do we start to look at integrating these across the business. Now, as we look at cloud computing infrastructure, clearly there is a whole series of foundation elements that continue to grow and really beginning in their maturity to support the range of cloud environments. And we look at infrastructure as kind of a broad term to look at a combination of servers and storage and services that can interconnect and support a broad range of your cloud computing priorities. Clearly, you're probably not going to be working with just one, and it's going to be important for you that are focused on understanding the infrastructure for cloud computing to be on top of all the major players and their efforts, because in essence, their computing environments are being digested and used by other layers above, we'll talk about in a second, and that you need to know where they're going and what you can expect. So it's really important to keep an eye on it. And this is just really a small set of the major players, and that you're going to need to take a look at which ones can start to look at and support your 3 to 5 year roadmaps. Now, clearly, as we look at infrastructure, while we might look at longer-term roadmaps, we also need to realize that things are changing on a monthly basis. So it's going to be pretty important for you to have kind of your technology and technology evaluation and intelligence teams continuing to stay on top of things, and obviously coming and listening to key events like CloudSlam to help provide quick updates on what's going on in the cloud computing environment. Now, as we look at cloud computing from an integration perspective, this is probably one of the most important elements of cloud computing that probably only has a fraction of the dialogue currently today. I started this discussion last year, and I feel really strongly about it because what we found is that businesses are struggling with interoperability, of cloud applications. They're struggling with the quick migration and enablement of cloud-based services. They're struggling with synchronizing data from cloud-based applications back into enterprise on-premise. And business and IT have only yet begun to really understand the important utility of integration and why that's so important. And clearly we've seen in the last year some pretty significant advancements and in cloud computing in support of that, and everything from even acquisitions of IBM buying Cast Iron and Dell buying Boomi, and new players that have begun to show some pretty significant progress in examples of their technology being used, from SnapLogic to Jitterbit, Talent introducing their services, Pervasive, and Informatica, and providing marketplaces and ways you can exchange the connections and ability to adapt to higher level tools and applications. So integration is probably one of the most important elements of cloud computing. If you don't have it on your blueprint, your focus area, you're probably going to end up increasing the cost of cloud enablement and increasing the risk of not interconnecting things in a most efficient manner. And the less custom coding and consultants you have to use, the better off you are. So you're going to probably need some tools to help you interconnect. And you're probably not just going to have one provider. You're probably going to have multiple providers supporting your efforts. Of course, on top of that, there's all series of platforms that you might be using to build applications. And the platforms have continued to expand, and we've seen now the ability for quite a few providers to provide the ability to provide this platform as a service. And we're seeing quite a bit of movement to make that pretty simple and straightforward, so you're actually building applications in the cloud, not just building them on-premise and then migrating them. And it's going to be important for you to look at how quickly you can assemble applications. And we won't talk about it too much today, but things that we've been researching and educating organizations around what we call information applications, and the ability to assemble and reuse components to be able to deploy certain kinds of applications much more rapidly. And we're beginning to see now new mobile platforms in the cloud that can also support some of these important elements of broadly making applications available via the mobile technologies that I've already spoken about. Now, business tools are important. What are the business users getting, what are they renting today, and what are they adopting, in many cases outside of the knowledge and scope of IT. But we're seeing quite a few, and quite a few we've seen from the analytics side, probably more often than not. So we've seen a pretty significant use of different kinds of analytics in the cloud, and also collaboration capabilities, things like Chatter. And you can see that many of the other kinds of business analytics in the cloud, from PivotLink or Oko or SAP or Vitria, there's quite a few, and this is only a sampling again, and there's quite a few providers that you can consider for supporting your needs in business, and then looking at how they interconnect with the integration technologies. Many of these do not interconnect as much into the platforms as much, because a lot of the tools are providing very specific kinds of capabilities you're probably not going to want to build from scratch, and are really going to help more augment and complement the business tools. To give you a sense of how fast the cloud computing environment is, we've recently conducted the largest business analytics research ever done across 2,700 organizations. And we looked at the preference for organizations to access business analytics, and on-demand software as a service was 27%. Now, on-premise still is over half, but if you look at the significant transition, and we've been measuring this for some time, there is a significant growth in the interest and demand by business to get on board quickly, and they see this whole cloud computing on demand as a path of that, much more than just a traditional hosted environment. And no preference means that they're neutral, looking at multiple ways. So the reality is that the stuff that I'm talking about is now fully in use in organizations, and most companies don't realize that there's thousands of companies that have embraced business analytics in the cloud to drive improvements. Now, the other thing, which I don't have a long period of time to talk about today, which is the continued advancement of business applications in the cloud. And I encourage you really to think about these in the line of business areas, so looking at what's going on in sales. So you could take a look at whether or not that's sales forecasting with Cloud9. You might be looking at sales compensation and sales incentive kinds of capabilities that you might find from a Xactly or from a Verisent or a Synergy. And you might think about things in finance. So you might think about financial management like Host Analytics, or accounting suites like NetSuite, planning like Adaptive Planning, maybe Spend with Coupa. The other thing that's had a significant driver towards cloud computing from an application is in talent management, where there's dozens of providers from Taleo to SuccessFactors to Sum Total Systems to Saba, down the list. There's quite a few that are already helping companies operate, frankly, not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands of employees with new kinds of talent acquisition to talent management applications. And each of these are helping not just HR, but the entire business ensure that they're acquiring, retaining talent, and supporting new sets of activities and processes. From a business and consumer services perspective, we talked about this, but what I encourage you to think about is how you can use these now new consumer services as potentially a path for your business services. And these business and consumer services now can interconnect and support. So if you're trying to promote your brand and look at what your customers think about you, you can use things like Yelp or like Foursquare. And if you're trying to promote your company and potentially job openings or your brand or promotions, companies are using Facebook. If you're trying to expand into networks of people, things like LinkedIn, who recently reached over 100 million members. And so there are things you need to think about from services that are not just their traditional scope of, is it designed exclusively for business, but how do these interconnect and complement support other things in your organization. This whole new decade of business computing now provides this concept of clouds, and clouds being the plural-based context of thinking about how you in business, with whether or not you're in one of these clouds or whether or not you're in IT, you start to build the new blueprint for your IT computing landscape. Because if your computing landscape is not embracing a cloud architecture and a set of very specific line of business clouds, then you're probably not being honest with yourself about what your organization's already doing today. And I always kid a little bit to say, if you look at your paycheck or your check that you get for working, it's probably been driven off of a cloud-based environment, such as ADP and many others, that actually produce these things where companies don't print paychecks anymore. And so there's plenty of great examples, but the reality is we've got to think about how to bring these things and interconnect them into the enterprise and support this interconnects that I talked about. And this integration as a service is, frankly, your plumbing. And just like you don't go out in the backyard and go to the well to get water, we take for granted by going to the faucet and getting water into our house. And that is the same context of what you've got to think about from an integration perspective. And then you also need to think about the applications and services that are the most need by business. I get the question all the time, how should we assess how to move forward? And I really believe in a simple framework. And I started my presentation today talking about smarter, safer, cheaper, better, faster. And if you paid attention to that portion of why it's so important for driving improvements, then you need to really think about how do we now look at our current business environment and actually use this as a lens for examining new cloud services. I've found still that many organizations are not getting business and IT together to work on what are the things that really need to be put in place. And IT is still trying to work through framework and infrastructure and dealing with lots of the larger technology vendors that do more marketing and don't provide enough substantive details on their services and their technologies, which is distracting them from the essence of what the business landscape is already transitioning and needs to work better together. And so IT is going to have to look at this quick onboarding where maybe things aren't always as perfect, but they meet the short-term business need. Frankly, you're going to have to, because renting these applications become are an operational expense and are not governed by any kind of traditional technology governance council. And so you're going to need to help provide support and make sure that things are working properly in your organization. So the question really for you is, are you getting smarter, faster, safer, and cheaper? Are you really driving improvements to the computing environment? Are you doing those within the rapid cycles? Are you getting caught up in the IT dilemma? Do you got a lack of collaboration? Are you really not knowing where you need to improve? Well, these are the things that we deal with it on a pretty routine basis at Ventana. And I encourage you to use a framework that we use for assessing suppliers and technologies and what we call our value index framework. It's a pretty simple and straightforward way for you to build evaluation, but ensure they're balanced. And so we look at the 7-point framework from usability, capability, adaptability, manageability, reliability, validation, and TCO/ROI. We've been applying our value index methodology to lots of new applications and tools over the last year, because frankly there's just been a lack of structured guidance from the analyst and research community, and lots of crazy 2x2s and dots and all this stuff. It really is, vision and all this stuff is not what you need to be focusing on. You got to focus on the here and now, and focus on the things that can help you evaluate and make the right selections. So I encourage you to think about and maybe think differently about how you review suppliers, and cloud computing is no different. Of course, as you drill down, you're going to build all kinds of sets of evaluation criteria, and depending on where you're building your detailed criteria across, reliability and manageability and some of these things, you're going to really need to think hard and really deep around some key areas like security and privacy and compliance and legal and monitoring and down the list. We found a lot that there's not enough technology translation of the service, the SLA, and understanding what you do have access to from a data and activity perspective that might need to be integrated into other cloud environments. And so you're going to have to reassess a lot of the things that you've been doing and look more closely at some of these details of where your applications and your data exist. Most people don't really know where it exists on the planet. And not as important knowing where it is, but how it's being managed and what can you interface at what time intervals are all part of ensuring that your infrastructure, your integration, your platform can have the right interconnects so you can support the tools, applications, and services that I spoke about. Now, what are some of the best practices in successful cloud computing deployments? Frankly, you need to be looking at things like this. Having the right leadership and sponsorship in the organization. You need to have the right program and processes, and I've provided you some ingredients to hopefully help improve your program and process. You need to have a good span of what are the right technologies that are ready for your organization, and having a razor focus on the benefits and results that you need to achieve on a very routine basis. So these are just a high-level view of some of the best practices, and of course you can follow with me afterwards, and any time I can tell you more about some of the best practice educations that we do as well. So what are the next steps for advancing cloud computing? Education, which we're doing, good examination, which we spoke about, collaboration among your peers and the environments, doing good assessments, as I talked about with the value index. Don't be too worried. The great thing about cloud computing is you can rent and try it and sample things, and you don't necessarily need to worry about spending $10 million or $1 million, or frankly spending $500,000. You can get started fairly quickly. Adoption, looking at ways that you can provide this stuff much more quickly and test it across business users and IT. Deployment, so making sure you understand the deployment mechanisms. Many cloud computing services are yet not mobile enabled, and so you really need to rethink your evaluation to ensure that the support for smartphones and tablets are on the roadmap, because if they're not, then you could be actually moving into an area that could be more legacy as your workforce may be more transitioning to spending more of their time in mobile technologies. Driving improvement's pretty clear, and that accessibility I spoke about is so important. And expanding further. This is not about picking one and doing a one-size-fits-all. You need to really think about this interconnected nature, and that really goes across a lot of the simplification and driving fewer vendors and suppliers. But frankly, the bigger suppliers are not necessarily the fastest movers, and they're acquiring companies to get both people and cloud computing expertise, and you're going to need to be able to balance the two together. Of course, there are things that big companies are doing to help expand and support this, but many of the things that they depend on today are still from purchasing of on-premise applications or tools or servers, and cloud computing is part of the future. so they're balancing their investments and now becoming much more engaged into the reality of improving their efforts. I encourage you to do a couple of things. One, we're actually in the middle of a sizable benchmark research on business data in the cloud. So you can come to ventanaresearch.com/BDC, that stands for Business Data in the Cloud, and start to learn more by participating in our benchmark, which is going to help guide both best practices and technology improvements that will clearly help you, along with your ability to get access to some really great research as part of that. And because we're really trying to help in that whole integration and support of things that are going on there. And of course then you can also catch any of our research team. You can go to blog.ventanaresearch.com. You can find many of us on the left-hand side and learn more about those environments as well. And you'll see our analysis, pointed analysis, and very direct analysis of the announcements as they come out every day of the year. So I encourage you to look at that as well. For all the rest of you, if you'd like to come and learn more, ventanaresearch.com on the internet. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Business Exchange. And you can send any inquiries at info@ventanaresearch.com. I really appreciate your time today and giving some insight, some of the things that we're doing at Ventana Research and research and education and benchmarking and technology, and hope today's presentation helped provide you some insights on the business and technology of cloud computing. And I hope you have a great CloudSlam 2011 experience, and we're so glad to be a partner with CloudSlam and look forward to supporting CloudSlam in the future. Thank you so much.